Today on The Big Story.
Now, if I give away 100 rupees for a 100 rupee transaction, to make up that 100 rupees, I will need to generate another 250 transactions of 100 rupees without an incentive. So this becomes an impossible task.
And it's interesting how something so basic sounding like UPI can actually be the center of such a big financial revolution, essentially, right?
UPI is a railway track. So imagine a future where the government owns all the railway tracks, the government owns all the stations.
Eventually, does UPI need to be profitable or just enough to sustain itself? The views expressed in this podcast are the speaker's own. The Quint neither endorses nor is responsible for them. Hi Prateek, hello.
Hello,
What's up?
hello Anjali, what's up? Hello to our listeners. क्या हाल है तुम्हारे?
मैंने हेलो नहीं किया listeners को, वापस करना पड़ेगा.
Anjali doesn't care about you guys, man.
I do. That is why I'm redoing this. Please take the second take.
No.
Hello listeners and Prateek.
वाह.
Welcome to the
मेरे
Big
से
Story.
पहले listeners, तुमसे पहले लूंगी.
Yeah.
मम्मी डैडी का ना.
Consumer is the king.
Yes.
Please.
Okay, so Anjali, what's up? क्या चल रहा है?
Fog.
नहीं,
Sorry, I had to say it.
No.
I tried very hard
This-
resisting it.
this-
Full 3-second pause I took not to say fog. But you said क्या चल रहा है?
It was a
it's
trap
a
and
reflex.
guys, Anjali फंस गई. So अब उनको मुझे UPI करने पड़ेंगे 1,000 रुपए. And the segue to this conversation is that only because in this episode we are talking about UPI.
What is the full form of UPI?
Unified Payment Interface. I was gonna say universal, but I am a fact-based podcaster, so I have done my Googles पहले से ही. So yes, we are talking about UPI because हमें recently तो नहीं, बहुत time से हमें realize हुआ that UPI is all around us, and I haven't personally gone to an ATM or I don't carry cash as much as I used to. Like, Anjali, how much cash do you carry? Do you have in your wallet right now?
More than not carrying cash, you have the confidence of stepping outside your house without having cash. की जो होगा देखा जाएगा. कुछ नहीं हो तो किसी को UPI करके पैसे तो I'll take cash from someone.
So yeah, we want to talk about UPI and understand कि ये पहली बात तो ये चीज़ work कैसे करती है, how does it work, how is it different from some of the other payment methods that we have, debit cards, credit cards, cash. Cash, by the way, now seems so archaic, right? Like every time.
ऐसा कितने ज़माने पहले लोग cash use करते थे.
I have one person in my whole, chain of merchants that I interact with every day. The guy who cleans my car, and he's also the same guy who irons our clothes. And he's the only person in my whole life who doesn't take UPI. I don't know why. And every time he sends his, and he's also very shana. Earlier he used to come to ask for the bill and all. वो पूरा bill बना के रखता है और वो महीने में 1-2 बार आता था. And I would always tell him, यार UPI ले लो please, नहीं है, cash क्यों लोगे? Now he sends his son.
Oh.
तो वो इतना छोटा सा cute सा बच्चा है, उसको मना भी नहीं कर सकते. And every time he comes, it's like a half-an-hour job just to find money
the cash.
from, मतलब मम्मा को, मैं पूरा घर पैनिक हो जाता है यार उस समय. मैं मम्मा को बोलता हूँ, मम्मा आपका पर्स कहाँ है, पापा आपका पर्स कहाँ है. ऐसे छुट्टे 10-10 रुपए के नोट जमा कर करके 50 रुपए बनते हैं. Because we don't have 50 rupees cash in our house, dude. This is so, like, now that I think about it, it's dangerous.
In my everyday life also, it's, I think only the taxi or like taxi rickshaws are the only people that for whom I carry cash. अगर मैं
They don't take UPI. तुम्हारा
so
ये
not so much in
Kali Pili and all of
Bombay.
that?
I mean, you have to ask, do you have UPI? There's a chance they might say no. So it's not like a foolproof thing. But this is what I experienced when I went to Bangalore. There every rickshaw guy. I went for a 4-day trip and I did
trust
not.
Bangalore cabbies to be as tech savvy as their engineers.
Yeah, I was in Bangalore for 4 days. I did not pull out my wallet even once.
Wow.
Everything, everybody, there's not one person who did not take a UPI payment there.
Nice. Interesting. I think in this conversation also, like, since you talked about you didn't open your wallet even once. We also want to look at personal spending habits, right? Because this is a theory that you had introduced me to.
No, I mean, it is a feeling more than a theory.
Yeah.
And it's what a lot of people also agreed with. But we have a feeling that we're spending more because it is easy to pay through UPI.
It's
You,
so easy.
you put in a code and the payment is done, and you do not feel that physically, the pain of physically paying money.
Yeah, you don't see your money,
Yeah.
right? Huh. So when it
Which
goes,
is
you
why-
don't feel as...
Yeah. And it's like, abhi, you have 2,000 rupees, let's say, in your wallet, and you pay 500, you can immediately see that now you have 1,500
कि
left.
कुछ कम हुआ है, हाँ.
हाँ, but you pay through UPI and you don't know, मतलब 2,000 का 1,500 हो गया.
This gets me thinking, my dad, you know, being like a dad, one of those dad conversations, he was telling me, giving me gyan and all, and he said, you should always know how much money is there in your wallet. जो उस समय पे, this was like back when I was in 6th or 7th and when I had my first wallet, और पहली बार स्कूल में wallet लेके जा रहे हैं, सब होता था. And my dad would be like, you should always know how much money is there in your wallet. And at that time it used to make so much sense to me, but now that I think of it,
Yeah.
you can't, मतलब I know how much money is there in my wallet because it's zero, like when it comes to cash, but I don't know what my balance is, dude.
Yeah.
Because
It's very difficult to keep track of it. Yeah. So which is why I think that we are spending more. But I don't know. We'll find out during the course of...
We'll find out.
But also what we want to look at while talking about UPI is a lot of our experience with UPI has been as consumers. We've looked at it as a way for us to pay money to merchants, to pay our friends, family, whatever. But there is a lot of other stakeholders in the process. Especially you have your merchants, you have the banks that are facilitating these transactions, basically doing these transactions, and then you also have the government, which is doing, I think, more of a regulatory role here. But there are other people involved in this process that we do not necessarily know how they look at UPI and
and where they fit in the whole chain of transactions, right? Yeah.
So that is also something that we want to understand in this podcast.
And one theory that I am very, excited about, and I really want to talk about it is, and this is from my personal experience with Google Pay, one app in particular, is that वो लोग पहले बहुत cashback देते थे यार. अब नहीं देते.
कितना ही scratch कर लो, मैं थक गई हूँ, better luck next time.
Yeah. Tell us in the comments अगर पिछले एक हफ्ते में तुम्हारा कोई actual rupee का cashback आया है, not some code or not some random astrology app का coupon code or better luck next time, as Anjali said. So that sort of got me thinking that is UPI then just another startup? स्टार्टिंग में मतलब
उसके है, मतलब साइंस कुछ
साइंस है ना, बिकॉज ऐसे फट से आया, नो, मतलब आई डोंट थिंक आज से, लाइक मुझे याद है मेरा जब फर्स्ट ईयर था कॉलेज का, दे वाज नो यूपीआई. आई थिंक सेकेंड या थर्ड ईयर में इट वाज बिकॉज ऑफ वन ऑफ सम ऑफ दिस गूगल पे का थिंग ओनली, वेयर अ फ्रेंड ऑफ माइन,
या यू रेफर एंड देन बस रेफरल पे तुम्हें 100 रुपए मिलेंगे.
या अ फ्रेंड ऑफ माइन सेड कि तू 50 भेजेगा तो हम दोनों को 50 मिलेंगे. एंड एट दैट टाइम इट वाज कॉल्ड तेज. Fun fact, if you guys are too young to remember, Google Pay was called Taze. So ऐसे आया फट से, gave so many cashbacks, not a lot of cashbacks anymore. It used to give so many freebies, but now there is actually conversation of making it chargeable for people, right? Which is the classic startup move कि पहले delivery charge free, सब कुछ free cashback मिल रहा है, और उसके बाद 100 रुपए से नीचे के order में delivery charge 50 रुपए का, all of that, right? So we shall also discuss it with our guest,
because we are also having a bit of a hard time understanding where are they making money, or how do they eventually plan on making money. Who do they charge? Like, do they charge us, the consumers? Do they charge merchants?
So yes, these are some of the questions that we have, and who is going to answer these questions, Anjali?
So we have one guest on this podcast. His name is Ateesh Tankha, and he's currently the founder and CEO of Also Wise Content Solutions. but he used to be the head of Citibank's merchant services till 2016. So he has had a lot of experience in payments and banking, and he continues to have that penchant for all of these because he writes about digital payments, digital commerce, frauds, cybersecurity, all of that.
Well.
Yeah, he's written on the Quint, and he's also like a regular columnist with Economic Times. So we have got him on this podcast to answer all of our questions.
Okay, so let us jump straight into it and talk about money.
Hello, hi Ateesh, welcome to the
Hello,
podcast.
Ateesh.
Hi Anjali, hi Prateek, and thanks for inviting me to your podcast.
How's your day going?
It's going well. It's been very busy, yeah. So
where are you based out of?
So I am currently based out of Calcutta, Kolkata.
Oh.
But I divide my time between India and Singapore. So my office, my development team are here, but I travel across India anyway. So.
Okay, so in this episode, we decided to talk about UPI, right? Which has, emerged as this crazy phenomenon in the past few years. So why don't you, for all our listeners, just explain what UPI is? I'm sure everybody knows, but what is that thing that
So
distinguishes it from...
so that's a great question. If I were to actually explain UPI to the lay user, it's basically a system which uses a mobile phone, typically a smartphone, to relay a transaction of funds from one bank account to another, right? So normally when you needed to make a payment to anybody, you would either need some kind of physical device like a credit card or a debit card, or you'd need to write a check, right, if it was in the physical world. Or if you were making an online transaction, then you would typically need a wallet, or you would need to go to Flipkart or Amazon, who have their own checkout paths with their own wallets, into which you typically load a card of some sort or some funding device to make a payment. The beauty of UPI is really in its simplicity, right? So regardless of how tech savvy you are, all it says is, do you have a smartphone? Yes. Do you have a bank account? Yes. Once these two boxes are checked, any participating bank account can be paid, and any participating bank account can be used to receive funds, right?
And if I'm not wrong, you don't even need to have a smartphone essentially, right? Because there is another way for feature phones to do that. There's a code that needs to be
That's
entered.
right. So you need to, yes, basically the beauty with UPI is you have a UPI code, right? And you have your password. Now, in the event that it is a smartphone, you can obviously scan a QR code, put in your password, and you're all done, right? So yes, you can do it either way. And most recently, what UPI has done is that they've introduced something called UPI Lite. So in certain rural areas where they don't even have proper internet connectivity or phone connectivity, it will allow a transaction up to 200 rupees, which will then be settled later, right? So as long as they consider you in good standing, they will allow that transaction, and then the settlement happens in a batch process later, right? So UPI is trying very, very hard to appeal to every segment of society, and is trying very hard to enable digital payments at all levels. And regardless of the denomination, so it doesn't matter whether it's less than 200, greater than 2000, you can pretty much use UPI anywhere. In fact, the most interesting thing I know about UPI is people of our socio-economic category today have stopped going to the ATM because of UPI. That's a very, very big change to even something just before the pandemic, right? And of course, for the rest of the people, it allows them to access electronic commerce. It allows them to make payments, without having to pull out cash or access cash. And so UPI has been very, very successful. Now, one thing go ahead, please.
I'll just share this very small anecdote. And I was talking to this stand-up comedian about another story, about how stand-up comedy has, evolved in India. And he said that one of the biggest factors of, all of this live music and live stand-up becoming so big was UPI, because people in small towns, you don't have your book my show, online net banking वगैरह नहीं चलता वहाँ पे.
Correct.
So what they say is, venue पे आओ, QR scan करके वहीं पे payment करके just
वहीं पे
go in. So that's so great
It's
that
an instant payment mechanism,
Yeah.
right? And you don't need any special wallets. You don't need to be able to access anything.
Yeah.
So it has been a very great democratic force within the payments world in India. So in that respect, hats off to UPI.
And is it
On the
is it
flip
something that's
side,
unique
yeah,
to India?
yes, there are reasons for that, right? So unlike the developed world, you take a place like America or take Europe or even Latin America, the proliferation of electronic commerce typically happen through cards. In India, despite our giant population, I want to say I want to now guess 1.4 billion, less than 20 million have credit cards.
Right.
And despite the fact that we claim that we have issued 900 billion debit cards, the actual users will probably be in the region of 200 million. So a billion people are excluded from that system. In America, that's not the case. Everybody has a credit card, everybody has a debit card, not just one. They'll pull it out like a pack of cards and ask you to pick one. You know what I mean? There are that many, right? So it's a very
I know people who have that credit card book where they have different thing for airlines, different thing for petrol.
Right. So it's a very very different world out there, and so UPI has actually gone a long way in allowing people to pretty much pay in a cashless way, right? But I would like to caution you. There are a lot of creation myths that have begun to surround UPI, right? Now, when NPCI actually developed UPI, they developed it in a small way. They said that, we're going to allow peer-to-peer, as in person-to-person transactions, right? In an easy way on the phone, as long as you have a bank account.
NPCI is the company that created it.
That's right, National Payment Corporation of India, right? It's an umbrella corporation, pretty much hosted by the RBI, and originally it had only 10 charter banks, which included 2 foreign banks, Citibank and HSBC. The other 8 were all Indian banks, SBI, HDFC, Bank of Baroda, ICICI, etc. Today, it has over 382 banks, payment service providers, etc. In a span of just 5 years, by 2021, this had happened. There's no doubt that, yes, the pandemic did help. Right, demonetization did not help so much. So this is a myth. UPI did not take off because of demonetization. It was very, very small at the time. I think in many ways UPI has flabbergasted its own creators. They didn't think it would become so big so quickly. I'm being very honest, right?
Yeah.
I'm very glad it has, but I don't think that was within their plan. There is an attendant danger to this. When you grow too quickly, the questions that are always at the back of your mind is, can I continue to afford it?
Right.
Because there are no free lunches. There is a cost associated. Do I have sufficient fraud early warning systems in place so that the average user does not get defrauded, does not get cheated? And as you know, UPI itself has attracted a lot of fraudsters, right? And there's a lot of stuff happening in that region. And then number 3, as I accumulate more and more players, how do I make it economically viable for the entire payment chain? Because by continuing to say zero MDR, zero MDR, zero MDR, a lot of people say, what, it's not worth it. Let somebody else do this. And that's exactly
what is zero MDR? What does that mean?
Okay, good point. So in any payment chain, except for cash, right? Except for cash, there is a cost associated with transferring a payment from A to B. Right? Very often, as it becomes more electronic, as it becomes more seamless, there are more and more payment intermediaries between the payee bank and the receiving bank, right? So each of these people are performing a function, right? One could be actually creating a card, one could be issuing the card, one could be taking the risk on the card, somebody else could be hosting a payment gateway, somebody else could be settling at the other end. Each of them deserves a certain amount of that transaction value to survive. Now, historically, in the world of credit cards and debit cards, the issuing bank never paid a penny. Right? The issuing bank basically said that since I'm taking the risk of the payment, right, I need to be paid something by way of compensation. That was called interchange. Right? So interchange is the amount paid essentially by the merchant's bank to the consumer's bank. Right? In addition to interchange, which is paid to an issuing bank, there are a host of other small fees. 10 bips, 10 bips as in 0.1%, 15 bips, 20 bips, adding all up, to MasterCard.
Issuing bank, you're saying, is the bank that
sends the payment.
that
Yeah.
gives out the payment.
So if I'm the buyer, if I'm the buyer and I have an HDFC bank card, HDFC is the issuing bank, right? If I'm making a payment at Spencer's and Spencer's has its own bank, whatever, let's just call it ICICI for simplicity's sake, ICICI becomes the acquiring bank, right? At that point of sale, right? So I basically hand over my card, I make a purchase, goods are transferred to me, and there's a settlement that happens from HDFC to ICICI, but a certain amount called interchange has to be paid back to the issuing bank. In addition to that, the merchant has to pay a cluster of small fees. It has to pay small fees to MasterCard or Visa, depending on who the network is. It needs to pay a small amount to the acquiring bank for managing that.
Yeah.
There's a POS, the machine provider.
Yeah.
There's a gateway fee, etc. So when you add it all up, typically in India, the total merchant discount rate, which includes interchange, ranges between about, say, 1.6, 1.7% all the way up to 3%. So for every 100 rupees, right, when I pull out a card, that's typically the discount rate that is applied.
Is this why a lot of times people either refuse to accept card at below a certain transaction amount or
That's
something like
correct.
that? Is this the reasoning behind that?
This is the reason, right? That they pretty much refuse. And in some cases, when it comes to Amex, because Amex charges a much higher merchant
accept
discount
that.
rate, they say Amex, we don't accept Amex. Right,
okay.
so that happens in certain merchant locations as well,
Yeah.
right? In the case of UPI, however, because the government was in a hurry to drive acceptance, not so much for consumers.
Yeah.
So P2P continued to grow, person to person, right? But when it came to person to merchant, right, where you have the small panwala, you have the small kirana dukan, as the case may be, those guys were not willing to pay a discount. As it is, they have the Vegas notion of how they're making profits. I'm being very honest, right? As much as we think that they are hardcore, businessmen, sometimes they have a vague idea of how they make profits. So these guys said, listen, you just host this QR tent card or this sticker, right? And there'll be no charge, right? You need to have a bank account and this money will automatically flow into your bank account, right? So as far as the merchants were concerned, their idea was, it's no skin off my back, we'll put it up there. The problem was that the Indian banks were not interested. So let's just be honest about this. Why is PhonePe and Google Pay, why do these two wallets control 80% of all UPI transactions, followed by PayTM, which controls another 16%? And then you have WhatsApp Pay, etc., which controls about 2%. The total banks in India, through their own UPI apps, have less than 2% of all transaction value. Why? Because banks are not interested. Banks are not in the business of payments. Banks are in the business of lending. They make money from lending, right? So they say, what am I going to do? Half these transactions are sub 500 rupees. मुझे tent card लगाना पड़ेगा. Tent card का useful life is not more than 90 days. 90 दिन के बाद replace करना पड़ेगा. I'll have a massive manpower running around India. Said, let PayTM do it, let PhonePe do it. Which is why, if you go to any pan dukan or kirana dukan, whose tent card is there? PayTM. PhonePe, right? Why? Those are the guys who've really done the work, if you ask me, of driving acceptance. And because these QR codes are interoperable, that means that it doesn't matter which app I open up, it will read the QR code and I can transfer the money. It has made it a very, very seamless process.
So Ateesh, if we go back a little bit, when you were talking about all the fees that a merchant had to pay, so you're saying the easier it is for a consumer to make the payment, the more people are involved in that process. So if we compare to, let's say, a credit card transaction to a UPI transaction, how many more stakeholders or how many more people are involved in a UPI transaction as opposed to, let's say, a card payment?
Sure. So I'll be honest. If you're looking at the convenience of the transaction, today for all transactions sub 5,000, you can take your credit card or debit card and you can tap it, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to UPI, in fact, you need to open your app, put in your password and pay. So if you ask me, the debit or credit card transaction is simpler, right? But how many people today in India have credit cards and debit cards? It comes down to that, right? Banks don't want to lend. Remember, a credit card is an unsecured loan.
Right.
What happens if I take a car loan? If I default, the bank can appropriate my car, right? With a credit card, they can't do anything. So banks are very, very circumspect about how to give money on credit cards. So how it is a loan. What is a credit card? It's essentially a line of credit, right?
Right.
With debit cards again, yes, a lot of people have debit cards, but very often they don't want to have to carry a debit card. They worry if I carry a debit card, somebody will steal it from my wallet, etc. There's all sorts of psychologies around this, right? And UPI is just much simpler because everybody carries the phone. Nobody forgets the phone. People may forget their wallet, right? But people will not forget their phone, right? And so it makes it that much easier to make these payments. Right, that's the basic funda behind why this has grown, right? So let's talk about some of the other reasons it's grown, right? Unlike, as I told you, how many people own credit cards or active debit cards, in India by 2020-21 there were about 750 million active internet users. Now, doesn't mean that you are using it on a laptop or a desktop. You could also be using the internet on your phone, right? And the phone is the most ubiquitous device. By last year, there were already 700 million smartphones that had been shipped. And they say that by 2026, there will be over 1 billion smartphones. So more and more in India, people are carrying smartphones because feature phones are disappearing. I'm being very honest, they are disappearing, right? Everybody knows how to use WhatsApp and everybody has learned how to use UPI. Right? If you think about it, WhatsApp and UPI are the mainstay of all mobile activity. Forget about people like us. We are more sophisticated. We can do whatever, right? But for the average person, it is WhatsApp, right? And it is UPI, right? And so UPI has grown the way PayTM could not grow. So PayTM, to be honest to them, they never had a business model. But they were very diligent in building the market. Right, so they were the pioneers when it came to the wallet, right? And they really tried to grow the market. They were hoping that after demonetization, PayTM would explode it in terms of growth.
Yeah.
What actually happened was that the RBI came down on them. The RBI, if you remember, from 2017 to 2018, they never let them onboard a single customer. Why? Because they say that they were in violation of KYC norms.
Yeah.
Right? And so they shut them down.
Which is after which that they were got much more stricter with how they allowed even peer-to-peer.
Exactly.
Yeah. I remember so many people who stopped using PayTM because yaar KYC karana padega because now they are
correct.
like,
You'll have to do KYC. Number one. Number two, PayTM until 2019 did not have a proper fraud or early warning system.
Okay.
So fraud was also beginning to mount. So people are saying, you know what, I don't want to use this anymore. I had a lot of fun with it in the last 3 years, but now I don't want to use it. And then on the back of that, suddenly UPI began to explode. So people said, wow, I've got a much easier system here. And PayTM and PhonePe jumped onto the UPI bandwagon. Right? So they basically became, in one sense, the kind of acquirers, the enablers at the point of sale. And you could continue to use your PayTM wallet to make a UPI transaction. And so they made sure that their top line growth existed, even though because of zero MDR, etc., they were not earning anything. Okay, now to be honest, when it comes to PayTM, one of the questions a lot of people ask is, why did PayTM not do as well as UPI, right? See, UPI did not give away money itself.
Okay.
What did PayTM do? PayTM said you spend 100 rupees, if you remember, 5-6 years ago. Spend 100 rupees, get another 100 rupees, right? So, now.
But I think even Google Pay and PhonePe at the very start of it gave a lot of those cashbacks.
Correct. But again, those are all wallets. That's not UPI. Those are wallets. Those are private companies.
UPI apps.
That's right. Right? Now, the problem is that on every transaction, 100, and just for simplicity, 100 rupee transaction, the net profit before tax that PayTM earns is probably 30 to 40 paisa. Now, if I give away 100 rupees for a 100 rupee transaction, to make up that 100 rupees, I will need to generate another 250 transactions of 100 rupees without an incentive. So this becomes an impossible task. It becomes, a paradox. When will I catch up? You will never catch up, right? If you know what I'm trying to say. So if there's a runner running a race with you and that guy is always double your speed, you can never catch up. You can try to do the math, but you can never catch up, right? It just doesn't make sense, right? So this is one of the problems with a lot of these wallets. They've spent a lot of money getting people to become users, but there's no profit in the payments. Now, PayTM Bank, right? Various companies are trying to sell insurance. PhonePe is trying to drive them towards e-commerce and insurance, etc. They can earn money there, but from the payments itself, there's no money. Right, so that becomes a very big problem for a lot of these wallet operators.
So you're saying that at the very base of it, the business model was what was not working for Paytm. So how does the business model of a Google Pay or a PhonePe differ from that?
Okay, so Google Pay doesn't make any money at all, whether it gives an incentive or not. Why? Okay, so there are two types of wallets. You have something called a back-to-back funding wallet. So in PhonePe and in Paytm, using a credit card, debit card, bank account, whatever, I will fund Paytm.
That wallet, correct.
Right? And then when I go to make a purchase with the Paytm wallet, the money is already there. That money will be used to pay the merchant. So in a sense, from a payments perspective, Paytm is paying the merchant. I am not paying the merchant.
Right.
Because I have already paid Paytm.
I have added money already.
Exactly. In the case of Google Pay, it's a pass-through wallet. Right? That means that Google Pay, for instance, is a pure UPI wallet. What do? I basically open it up, scan the QR code, put in my thing, enter, paid. You get the tick mark, paid. End of story. It's a pass-through wallet. Google's Play is not about payments. They actually want to try and harvest data. They want to try to figure out where all these people are playing, because where does Google make its money? Advertising. It doesn't make its money from payments. It's not really a payments play. This is an adjacency to its core business, right?
Yeah.
So
in general, search engine, YouTube, it doesn't make any money from either videos or search
exactly,
engine.
Right? That's the whole idea, right? So even with Paytm and all of that, I think everybody understands we are not going to make money purely from payments. But as I grow a larger and larger base that is more and more engaged with my wallet, what can I use my wallet for? Can I now use it to cross-sell them insurance? Can I use it to cross-sell them a bank account or an instant loan, buy now, pay later loan? Can I use it to somehow, advertise certain things to them, drive them to certain e-commerce sites, etc.? That's where they hope the money will come from.
Okay, so we have talked about, various kinds of revenue models of different entities like Paytm, buy now, pay later. But how does something like NPCI make money?
So NPCI is a non-profit.
Oh,
so a lot of people think it's a private company.
Yeah.
In one sense, you can call it an independent company. It is an umbrella organization. RBI, right? And then charter banks, and then members. Members can include Paytm, it can include non-charter banks, etc. Today, as I told you, they've got about 380 various members, right? They are a not-for-profit organization. So they are not expected to make losses, right? But I guarantee you that today the government is subsidizing them. They are subsidizing that. But remember, UPI is a network. UPI itself does not say, here, use my app. They say use your bank app, use Paytm, use Google Pay, whatever, right? All of that, right? But UPI is basically providing a network. Originally, it was meant for P2P transactions. Then it became P2M. Now they have said that you can even RuPay credit and debit cards can be used on the network, right? Now they have even said that a lot of these banks, Indian banks, can have prepaid loans associated with you, and they can offer it through UPI at the point of sale. So let's say that I'm going to make a purchase. I'm going to buy, I'm just making it up, something which is 6,000 rupees in a store, right? State Bank of India, who is my bank, realizes that you're going to make this. They may come back and say, listen, I've got a very attractive personal loan for you. I can break this 6,000 into 4 payments of 1,500, right? Would you like to take it? Press yes, okay, all set. So they become also like a buy now, pay later, or they give you an instant loan on the spot. So UPI makes no money.
So for all of them, lending is where the money is. And so through all of the other processes, they're trying to get as many users as they can.
Either lending or data or loans or something else, something besides the payment itself.
Absolutely. I mean, how do credit cards make money? They induce you to spend more than you can pay back. in the hope that you will revolve whatever you have and they will earn interest. Otherwise, credit cards lose money with me. I don't revolve.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they lose a ton of money with me, right? Because also my credit card bill is not 1,500 rupees in the month. It
Exactly.
is considerably
Yeah.
more. So they are losing a lot of
Yeah.
money because they also need to
Yeah.
pay for
Rewards
rewards,
and all
right?
of that. Yeah.
And interchange typically pays for rewards, so it nets off at zero, right? So that's what happens here.
But if we go on a
Interesting.
more personal level with UPI, so this is something that really sparked like our discussion on UPI started from a lot of people realizing that having such an easy form of payment made us all spend much more money. But statistically speaking, do you think that UPI is really doing that, changing any of our spending habits?
So I'll be honest, I've not seen the data. It may be happening, but I don't want to talk out of turn. I personally have not seen the data. Like you, I'm very interested to know if this is true, right? It is true that UPI has grown by leaps and bounds, but especially during the pandemic, it basically grew at the expense of cash, right? There was a myth
Right.
being circulated that if you paid by cash you would get COVID, which is absolute nonsense. You are more likely to get COVID by somebody coming close and touching plastic to plastic than you are from paper and cotton, right? Which is what cash is made of. But I have not really seen it. Now there is a research agency called CEBR, right, that came out and said that during the pandemic, UPI was able to save the government about 12.5 billion rupees, right, in cash related expenses, right, which has resulted in an impact to India's GDP of 16.5 billion, etc., etc.
Save as in, sorry, how did UPI manage to save that much money?
And what are these cash related expenses?
You need to print cash, you need to store
Like that.
cash,
Okay.
etc., right? So what you do is that for every, I'm just going to make it up, for every 2,000 rupee note that you produce, let's say 3 paisa is the cost of storage, transport, or whatever, right? So when you multiply all of that and say that I didn't need to print so much because people were paying bank to bank, right? Again, this is highly speculative. I'm sorry, you know what, having spent a decade in banking, credit cards, merchant acquiring, I find it very hard to believe, right? But like I said, it is possible over a period of time that UPI will spur spend. But to spur spend,
Sorry, can you explain what spur spending is?
so what I mean is you want to increase spending through a particular medium, right? Two things have to happen. Number one, it's the only way to pay,
Okay.
right? So hypothetically, let's say that there's a village and the only way to pay is cash. So the only way to increase spending in that village is to make sure that the villagers have more cash,
More cash.
right? So it's
Right.
simple, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, with UPI, let's assume that in the village, the government somehow, with a stick most probably, goes and tells every panwala and kirana wala that you will not take cash. Then the only way to spend is through UPI. That means that you are now going, right? However, for somebody to spend more than he or she is used to spending, you need to have a cushion, a comfort.
Right.
You need to believe that I can take a line of credit. So this is the most important thing, right? So the government is now trying to make sure that UPI also becomes a channel for pre-approved loans, use a credit card, if at some point in time this makes sure that even people at the bottom of the pyramid get a small line of credit. So if somebody today
Right.
gets 1,500 rupees in cash and spends 1,400 rupees, I'm just making up a number, right? And tomorrow, in addition to that, they get another 1,000 rupees of credit, easy credit. They may end up spending 1,800 rupees instead of 1,400 rupees.
Yeah.
Right.
And that is how that increase would happen.
That is how it right? That is how America became so big.
Essentially,
Right?
yeah.
Because of credit.
They gave
Right?
loans,
Because
so,
of credit,
yeah.
not that's correct, right? So
Yeah.
this is a challenge, this is a quandary for the government. When the government talks about financial inclusion is not about giving you a way to pay electronically. Financial inclusion means, am I part of the credit cycle?
And do people in general have more money in their
That's
pockets?
it. And
right?
do they feel confident enough to say, you know what, theek hai, instead of spending 2,000 rupees this month, I'll spend 3,000 rupees. Then the entire economy will begin to rise, obviously, right?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that the nature of payments might have changed from cash to UPI, of course, But it's not that we in pure numbers might be spending so much more because पैसा ही नहीं है इतना लोगों के पास essentially.
So I'll give you an example. Suppose PayTM comes to you and says, oh, we have grown the payments by. Okay. How?
Yeah.
Earlier people were, and no cash. This is all electronic.
Yeah.
Earlier people were spending 100 crores a month. Now they are spending 150 crores a month. So
Yeah.
that's correct.
Yeah.
However, when you look to see, oh my God, PayTM basically gave 50 crores away for free, saying spend 100, take 50, right?
Yeah.
So 100 crores became. That is a fallacious way. That doesn't grow the market. That's just a
Correct.
blip. It will
Yeah.
come down, right? Similarly with the government, through the alphabet soup of all these Jan Dhan accounts and all that, what is it? It is basically direct transmission of subsidies. So if the government was giving 3,000 rupees, people are spending 3,000 rupees. If they give 5,000 rupees, it's not necessary that they'll spend 5,000 rupees, but they may spend 3,500 rupees.
Yeah.
So in lieu of credit, if the government increases the subsidy, there is a likelihood that at the bottom of the pyramid, people will begin to spend more. And that may actually drive a little more of spending on UPI and other form factors, and therefore taking up the overall GDP through consumption. Now, I must tell you, recently, perhaps, with a view to rewarding PhonePe and PayTM, who have been bleeding profusely for the last 3 years because of zero MDR, the government has now come out and said that for any person to merchant transaction greater than 2,000 rupees, on average, you will earn about 1.1% on an interchange basis, right? So that means PayTM, PhonePe can earn that. Already, merchants, yesterday I went to a very large Chinese restaurant here in Kolkata, and already there was a poster out there saying, until further notice, we will not accept UPI payments.
Oh, so the same thing जो credit card के साथ एक time पे होता था, that will
Right, they're saying
start
that
with-
for whatever reason, right? I mean, now it's very difficult to specifically explain why, but already there's a bit of a pushback, right? What does this tell me?
Right.
This tells me that UPI is not a small percentage of overall payments. A lot of people are using UPI to pay. And if a large enough group of people are using UPI to pay, then the interchange makes a big difference. And that is where it could impact the fortunes of UPI.
So if I'm making a payment, let's say through my PayTM wallet to a QR code of, let's say, HDFC Bank, then HDFC Bank has to pay that money to PayTM without impacting the consumer or the merchant as of now, or have they transferred that to the merchant as well?
No. So remember, the HDFC bank account is the merchant's bank account.
Right.
What it basically means is that the merchant has to pay 1.1%.
Oh.
Look, technically speaking, one bank account is compensating another bank account, but it's not the banks who are doing it. It's basically my bank account that is being debited.
So that's what I wanted to understand. Correct. The merchants will have to eventually pay that interchange.
That is correct, right? The consumer does not get affected, but the merchant gets affected. MDR, merchant discount rate, is always applied to the merchant. Always.
Now, extending this, there is also sort of like a debate and conversation about charging UPI, having some sort of a transaction fee for consumers as well. So what are your thoughts about it, and what are the consequences that might raise?
I was on vacation in Southeast Asia when the chief architect of this idea, he is a professor in IIT Mumbai, actually called me, and we had a long conversation one evening, right? And I told him, I said, nowhere in the world can you charge the consumer.
Yeah.
Here's the reason why. The consumer doesn't care about payment form factors.
Yeah.
Right? You want me to pay in cash, I'll pay in cash. If you say no cash on delivery, pay with card, I'll pay with card. I'll pay however I can pay, right? But at the end of the day, by making a purchase from you, the merchant, I am doing you, the merchant, a favor.
Consumer is the
So
king.
the whole point is, exactly. So if UPI is really growing the size of commerce, who really benefits? The merchant.
Correct.
Right? Because without that, the merchant would have fewer sales. With electronic commerce, the merchant is having greater sales. So the merchant needs to bear the cost for that system. And that is the logic that has stood the test of time for more than 70 years across the developed world, etc. I think it's going to be very difficult to now come to a consumer and say, just for the pleasure of using UPI and pressing some buttons, now I'm going to charge you 1 rupee on every 100 rupees you spend. That's just not going to fly. I assure you there'll be a massive fall off, right? So that doesn't really work. It doesn't really work.
But do you think then the idea for these people who support this idea is something like people are so hooked on to UPI that then switching back to cash or something like cards would be so difficult that,
I don't. So I must tell you, I disagree, and I'll tell you why. You look at the average value of a UPI transaction. So you have two types of UPI transactions: person to person, person to merchant.
And person to merchant.
Person to person is in the region of about 1,500 rupees. Average value. Obviously, it's up and down. Person to merchant is still very low. It's about 750 rupees. When you look at a debit card transaction, which is always person to merchant, right? It is in the region of 3,500 to 4,000. Credit card is closer to 4,500 to 5,000. ATM withdrawal is greater than 5,000. Right? So I'm just trying to tell you, even today, a lot of the high value transactions are still happening on other form factors, not UPI. Right?
So even though it seems much more ubiquitous, it is actually...
And don't get me wrong, it is more ubiquitous. It is more ubiquitous than any other.
But it's not having as much of a dent as we think it is, right?
So the volume of transactions is, I want to say, of all electronic transactions in India, UPI will be 84%. It's that big. Value-wise, it'll probably be closer to 50%. So there is a fall-off. There is a massive fall-off, right?
Correct.
Cash itself will be as large as or greater than all electronic transactions in India, including UPI, right?
Even right now,
right? So it's a huge market, right? And the thing is, we have imperfect information about what's happening, right? So if you tell me that every time you use your card, your UPI code, you'll be charged this, you'll be charged this, you'll be charged that. After a while, I'm going to get irritated. I'll say, why am I being charged? You want me to pay by UPI, right? I'm happy to pay by credit card. If I pay by credit card, you can't charge me. If I pay by debit card, you can't charge me, right? If I give you cash, you can't charge me. Why should you charge me for UPI? Right? So there will be a pushback. And the other thing people must understand, even that 750 rupees, as small as it seems, is driven by the top 25% of India's economic class.
Right.
So if that top 25% say, what the hell, I'll tap my card, it's just as easy as doing this, right? Suddenly that 750 rupees may fall below 400 rupees. And suddenly the value pie of UPI will start shrinking. Remember, when the three of us say we don't go to the ATM anymore, right? That means we have decided that we will not pull 5,000 rupees or more every time we go to the ATM, right? But the average person doesn't have 5,000 rupees to pull from the ATM. And when I go right to the bottom of India's pyramid, right, so if somebody were to tell me, if you use a card, no charge. But if you use UPI, 1.5%, what will you do? I'm telling you, mentally I'll get irritated. I'll say, the hell with this here, just take my card. Right? If I go and make a purchase of 10,000 rupees, I don't want you to charge me 150 rupees. I'm going to say, what is this 150 rupees? For using UPI. Will you accept it? You will not accept it, right? You're not going to accept it, right? So these are attendant dangers to the entire system. At the end of the day, if a merchant believes that I am getting value from UPI, earlier 20 people used to come to my Kirana Dukan. Today, on average, 50 people come to my Kirana Dukan. That means that more people are using. Then he or she should be willing to pay 1 to 1.5%, whatever it is, MDR, for the purpose of enabling UPI.
So another thing that we want to talk about a little more in detail is how involved is the government in this process? Are they involved just as a regulator in the form of RBI? Because we've seen that the government did develop apps such as Beam. And like we discussed, it's even NPCI falls under a bigger umbrella that is again in the government's control in some ways.
So that's a great question. So the government is not just a regulator, right? Everybody in the government, from the president to the prime minister to the finance minister to anybody, you choose, take your pick of anyone in parliament, they all think that UPI is the greatest thing, if not since sliced bread, since the advent of the ATM, right? At least since the ATM, this is the greatest fintech innovation in the world, right?
Yeah.
In many ways, they're right because of its meteoric rise and because of the sheer proliferation and acceptance of this product. However, now I'm speculating, right? I think if the government is being smart, they have a much grander vision today, not in 2016, but today for UPI, right? Number one, they've realized that it's easily accepted by everybody in India. They've realized that such a utility doesn't exist abroad, because in most developed countries there will be pushback from the banks to develop something like this because it'll eat into their own profits, right? Even when they are into payments. And so they hope, by offering this in Singapore, by offering this in Dubai, maybe doing it in Bangladesh tomorrow, wherever, Nepal, you take your pick and stroll, that they will now create India's own international network, which could start rivaling MasterCard and Visa. And unlike MasterCard and Visa, who pretty much only play in the debit and credit card space, these guys can allow direct bank-to-bank transfers. Right? So it's a much more it has the likelihood of being a much more ubiquitous network. That's number one. Number two, I want to just go back a few years. In 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea, the US decided to impose sanctions on Russia. What was the first thing they do? They told MasterCard and Visa shut down. The whole of Russia, imagine the entire country, more than 120 million people, could not use a single card anywhere, not even in the ATM. Not even in the ATM, right? So there's complete chaos and pandemonium. Now, I'm not trying to defend Russia, but I'm just talking about your sovereign right as a nation.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of thing that would put an idea into India's head, saying we never want to be beholden to any foreign network. Not because we'll ever be sanctioned by the United States tomorrow, but why shouldn't we build our own?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And once you build your own, then you can pretty much, it doesn't matter. And I'll tell you, I personally have a feeling, and if the government of India is smart, they should do this. Tomorrow, you will start getting credit and debit cards where you will have MasterCard or Visa, the badge, and you will have another badge which says RuPay.
Oh.
And it will be up to the merchant to determine, should I settle through Visa, MasterCard, or should I settle through RuPay? And if RuPay is cheaper, I mean, no guesses about where this will go. Right?
And eventually that would reduce our dependence as an economy on dollars as well.
Total dependence. Right? Now that comes to the third point. It's a great point you bring up. What is CBDC? By itself, it's nonsense. But if you want to reduce your dollar dependence, right, and you want to settle directly, the wider you have a UPI network, remember, I am not thinking now of UPI as a way to pay people. I am now thinking about it as a network, as a payment rail, right? Just like MasterCard and Visa and Venmo abroad allow cryptocurrencies. Tomorrow, UPI can allow CBDC. E-Rupee.
Yeah. CBDC, for our listeners who don't know, it's central bank digital.
Central bank digital currency, which is just a digital form of the Indian rupee, right? Then all of a sudden, UPI becomes the rails for people to start settling in our currency directly.
Yeah.
And there's going to be no question of, a forex charge, no question of converting to dollar to ruble or whatever, right? It's just as long as you have a corresponding bank there who's willing to accept this, automatically you can settle, right? So I personally think the government has a larger vision, right? Naturally, you need to plan and plot this.
So all of this, are you saying that the government has this in their vision, or are you saying these are the best practices that should have?
Now I'm speculating. I certainly hope they have this, because if they do not, then I have no idea why they're going crazy with UPI. Right? Just as a payment utility.
We have discussed that it's as useful / useless as your
others, right? Yes, it's cheaper, it's more accessible to everybody. I accept all that, but I think UPI can really become the 300-pound gorilla on the face of the globe. Forget India, right? And it can really further India's ambitions to propel the rupee into a basket of global currencies, right? And allow certain states at least to settle in that currency, right? So you're right, the dollar dependence would go down. It would also give us an independent network, right? We would be independent of MasterCard, Visa, etc., right?
Exactly. What Visa and MasterCard were to the US,
would become
UPI
RuPay would
could be
become
to
to
us.
RuPay and
UPI.
the UPI network. Because imagine if you have a card or some other utility, like actually, I think cards are going out of fashion. It's all going to be the smartphone eventually, right?
Yeah.
But what I mean is that imagine if you can pay through a credit line, you can pay through your bank directly, you can pay in E-Rupees, you can pay through bank tokens.
Yeah.
It suddenly makes it a much more versatile network compared to a lot of the existing networks, right? So when I say the E-Rupee is really the digital form of a rupee. What you have in your bank is not the digital form of a rupee. It is not even a rupee. So you need to think of the bank like a casino. I take money and I give it to them and they give me chips.
Yeah.
Right? And those chips I can use on my credit card and debit card. Right? Why? Because two banks have agreed that on the back end they will actually transfer rupee reserves. But as far as we are concerned, we are just seeing numbers. It's a promise.
Yeah.
Right? It's a promise.
Even if you read on the cash, it says I owe the bearer. It's not.
That's it, right? That's what it is. So it's not a real rupee, but CBDC, again, central bank digital currency, the E-Rupee, is really a digital form of the rupee. It does not need to go through a commercial bank. That is to say that the Reserve Bank, if it so desires, can directly come to me and give me E-Rupees. I don't need to go through a bank. I don't need to go through HDFC or ICICI, etc., etc.
So another thing that you mentioned, since we're talking about the government's, the government's role in this, or the government's idea of UPI, vision with UPI,
right,
like you said, it is a great form of surveillance also. Right? I mean, you can see who is spending what and where.
About a month ago, Shaktikanta Das, the governor of the RBI, came out with this whole thing about not Har Bar digital, Har payment digital. Okay? I'm not sure that's a good thing.
Okay.
Every citizen of every country in any part of the world reserves and deserves the right to keep a certain level of privacy.
Yeah.
As long as I'm not selling drugs, I'm not buying guns, I'm not into some kind of terror financing, the government and the banks and the tech companies do not need to know everything I do.
Yeah.
So when I use a debit card and a credit card, you are basically paying rent to the financial system, and you are allowing the financial system to see what you do, transactions. When you use cryptocurrency and you use all these wallets with UPI also, both the government and the tech firms get to see what you're doing.
Right.
After a while, it comes down to where does this end? Because they don't want you to use cash. Cash in many ways is a way to stay independent.
Yeah. And it's actually bad for them as well.
It's bad for them because they can't see, they can't control, right?
Yeah.
Right. A lot of people say, MasterCard's slogan is a world without cash. Do we really want a world without cash? Do we believe that if cash disappears and everything is electronic, that system cannot be hacked, that the system cannot go down? Imagine a day when it's all digital and the system goes down. How will you make a payment?
Yeah. Or the example that you gave about the Russia sanctions, right?
Correct. Somebody kills the switch, destroys the switch, right? The payment switch, etc. What happens, right? So you always want cash because cash, after all, is bona fide currency. Yeah. It is the fiat currency of the land. Yeah. Nothing else is real currency.
And it's the most basic that you can get, right? Actually handing somebody down money in their hands.
That is correct. Right? And it is the only thing you own. The moment you put it into the bank, you stop owning it. You're hoping that it's there, that tomorrow the bank doesn't say, sorry, we are shutting shop. You're hoping, right? But the point is,
it's not like it's not
happened. It's happened any number of times,
India.
Right? Exactly, right? Yeah. So it is important. We need to allow for choice, right? I think cash has its place, UPI has its place, electronic forms of payment have their place, but I don't think we should go purely digital. I don't agree with that.
So, what do you think have countries, the more developed countries like the US, what are the price that they have paid for going, so cashless?
No, so I must tell you, unless things have changed very much in the last 3 years, and I doubt it, uh, cash still makes up a third of all payments in the United States. And a third of spending in the US is probably larger than all the spending in India. Just the sheer value, right? So check and cash, right, and they're pretty much interchangeable, make up about 35%, and the rest is obviously digital, right? Credit cards, debit cards, wallets, Apple Pay, you name it, right? The price they have paid is that after a while, everybody knows exactly what you spend on. Everything, right? And to the extent that they have gone used to that system, and if that system collapses, there will be a real problem. There will be a real problem, right? So let me explain. The fractional reserve lending means that the same 100 rupee note is in two places at the same time. What does that mean? I think it's in my bank and I can withdraw it, and the bank thinks that it's actually been lent to Anjali because Anjali went to buy something. The same 100 rupee note has been lent out and I'm thinking it's in my bank, right? So it is a confidence trick. What is a confidence trick? The bank thinks Anjali will not come to withdraw the money today, so let me lend it out, right?
Exactly.
Right?
This was a joke that a few of my friends were once having, that what if everybody in India decides
I want my money back.
withdraw money at the same time?
The entire banking system will collapse.
Yeah.
It will collapse overnight. No, forget it. The Indian government will not let you do that. They will post army jawans there to stop you from. No, don't laugh. I'm serious. They will stop it. They will not. They cannot allow it. The whole system will collapse. Right?
Wow.
It's right. So in the US also, people have forgotten the basic essence of saving. They spend and they spend and they spend. Right? And until such time as the dollar is the world's reserve currency, they have a cushion, right? But I think that is now being severely challenged. I think even the Federal Reserve has come to a point where they realize that there's too much money floating out there. And as they keep ratcheting up the interest rate, people will start spending less because it's more profitable to keep money in the bank. For the first time in at least 2 generations, you can earn so much interest in a US bank, right? So there are a lot of ups and downs to this. There's no perfect solution, but in India, the vast majority of Indians have never had the opportunity to spend anything of any value. So I think, as credit begins to proliferate, right, I think there'll come a time when slowly consumption as a factor of GDP will begin to rise more and more meteorically, and eventually no country becomes rich until its consumers are willing to spend. And if you ask me, willing to spend at least 60 to 65% of what they earn. So, and India is very far away from that today, very, very far away, right? So there's a lot of scope to expand and grow. And I think, in the next decade, as everybody keeps telling us, it will be India's decade. We still need to navigate it cautiously, right? We cannot be, crazy about the way we try to grow. But I think, yes, I think there will be financial inclusion. We'll find more and more people coming out.
Real financial inclusion, and not
that's
just
right.
getting more.
Not just the lip service, that I made a wallet available to everybody. Great. So how does that help anybody, right? So that's I agree. So that's how it works.
And it's interesting how something so basic sounding like UPI can actually be the center of
such a big shift.
Such a big financial revolution, essentially, right? Interesting.
When you think of it in theory, it feels like, why wasn't it thought of before? Because it sounds so simple. You're like,
I agree. It took, look, I mean, why did PayTM come about? PayTM, so if you think about, IMPS and NEFT and all the rest of it, banks also had this long before PayTM was thought of. But banks, again, didn't care. Half the time you were trying to get an OTP, the OTP didn't come. Very often there was a lot of fraud in between because you were waiting, right? So PayTM came and told people, I'll take care of everything. Don't worry. There'll be no failure. The failure rate will be 1 in a million. You'll always get the OTP. And once you've paid me, I undertake to pay the merchant. You don't need to worry. You'll always get your goods on time, whatever you're purchasing, etc. Right? So PayTM was actually filling a gap that the banks had essentially deserted. Right? Right?
And then on the
Right?
back
Sheer
of
dereliction.
PayTM is where something like
came
a UPI.
UPI because eventually PayTM is a private company. The government wanted to see, because even for PayTM didn't want to go into the rural areas. Why will it go to the rural areas?
Yeah.
They don't have money. They don't have any money. How are they going to fill that wallet, right? Etc. So now comes UPI, right? And you had basically, the ABPS, which is that Aadhaar payment bridge system by which the government pretty much gives subsidies to people directly, right? And so now there was an automatic way by which that could be used without those people having to go to, a money lender or to some bank correspondent or to an ATM to withdraw money.
Yeah.
I've got it here, and now I can automatically invoke that and make a purchase at a merchant who accepts UPI.
Nice. So I think this was an amazing chat till now. A lot of our ideas that we had, and even our listeners, I'm sure, would be have gotten some perspective. Now to close, we want to discuss a theory that essentially started our conversation. Like, this is how we started developing this thing, because both of us think that, and we want to ask you this, that is UPI then just another startup which might bust
If you look at
someday?
you look at some signs, just the way that it has been, distributing these very attractive cashback offers right at the start. Now it's declining.
Came from nowhere, in line with the digital geo revolution.
Very, very thin revenue streams, not making any money. Just resembles every other startup. So how close are we to the truth?
So, I think we need to think of UPI. I'm just trying to give you an analogy. We need to think, just imagine UPI is a railway track. So imagine a future where the government owns all the railway tracks. The government owns all the stations. Okay? But the government does not own the trains. The government is not in the business of carrying either passengers or cargo. Right? Those are all private entities doing whatever they need to do, including public sector units, but the government is not involved. We need to think of UPI like that. So the government has created these rails, payment rails.
Yeah.
The government has created a kind of interface. Think of the interface as a kind of railway ticket window, for want of a better, I'm just making it up, right? But all the players who are buying and selling are private. Okay? So the government has created the rails. Why? Because it wants people to be able to move around India, right? It wants goods to be able to go to every corner of India, right? Right now the government is saying, because I want everybody to use this service, it's free. Just don't destroy the rails, okay? And make sure that whatever promise you are making to either side is kept. And make sure
whatever train that starts from A station reaches the
other station, people get there
time,
safely, there's no defrauding of people, etc. etc. I've built this entire system, right? So in that sense, it's not a startup. However, it is expensive. There is a cost to maintaining this, right? And yes, NPCI is a not-for-profit entity, but the government is definitely sponsoring this, right?
Exactly.
But it's a great utility, like the railways. It's a great utility, right?
Correct.
So now it comes down to, at some point in the future, the government will probably start charging a small amount, right? Every time you come to a station or stop at a station, every time or for every transaction, you pay me 2 paisa, 3 paisa on the thing, right? So that the government can maintain this system. Because I'll tell you, as UPI grows, there are at least 4 things the government needs to take care of. One is security. No matter how secure you are today, the hackers will figure out how to hack. Because it's the same guys who are writing your security code, the other side, the same guys are hacking, right?
Yeah.
So you need to constantly invest in security. It's not cheap, right? Yeah. So you need money to invest in security. It's very, very important.
And that is the government's responsibility to do that?
If you own the rails, yes it is. If you own the rails, remember, the wallet will create its own security. But you also need to have
rail
track
security. Pe bhi security honi chahiye.
Security honi chahiye, right? Number 1, right?
Correct.
Okay, number 1. Number 2, seamlessness. Today, we think it's absolutely seamless. Tomorrow, with Android and Apple and whoever else, right? Tomorrow, we may not even be using mobile phones. It may be some other type of device. Who knows, right?
And
So
even today, I
keeping
think
up.
there are issues of transaction drops and all of that, right?
Correct. A lot of this, right? Which is why they've come out with
Yeah.
UPI Lite, which says that regardless of transaction drops, up to 200 rupees I'll allow, right? So keeping up with this whole concept of convenience and seamlessness means you need to keep investing in technology to keep it modern, right? Not just for India, because as I said, the government has international ambitions.
Yeah,
right?
UPI has also gone global in a few
Gone
countries.
global, right?
Yeah.
Number 3, process improvement. So today it is payments. Now it is saying you can also add RuPay. You can also have some pre-approved loans which can be offered. So there could be a lot of adjacencies. So making it as nimble, as flexible, process improvement to ensure this is very important. Again, it takes huge investments, right? And I think the third is cost effectiveness. So the best way to keep it cost effective is to have the largest number of users using the largest number of aspects. Because then the cost per transaction comes down to
Really
nothing.
comes from. Right.
Right? So it's a factor of these 4 things that the government has to invest in. The government knows it. It's not that the government does not know it. I'm not saying anything that is particularly insightful. And these are the reasons why it's not a startup. Look, a startup wants to exit. The government does not want to exit. Neither does it want to sell.
At
right?
least it
Nor is
shouldn't.
it. Yeah, right. That's not going to happen, right? And so in that respect, it's not a startup. The government is not giving away freebies. All the government has done is it has brought down zero MDR, but that has no impact on the government. The government has actually punished the private players in one sense, right? But the government doesn't bear that cost to an extent, right? So it's not really a startup, but it has to invest like a startup. Right? For it to continue to be relevant, for it to continue to be cost effective, for it to continue to be attractive to both domestic and international users, both retail as well as business users, over a period of time, it needs to invest heavily in this. Because if it does not, it has everything to, how do I put this, to lose. The government needs to do very little to win. It's winning anyway with UPI. It has everything to lose. So if it slows down the pace of investment, if it slows down the pace of expansion, if it somehow stops dead its vision, saying we won't do this, we won't do that, right? Eventually others will begin to challenge.
Or I would even assume, even if it stays limited to just payments, right?
After a while, it'll become a non-entity, right? So it would be
Yeah.
foolish to do that. I think the government does have a winner. I think beyond their wildest expectations, it has grown to what it has become, right? I think the government now needs to very methodically plan what it wants to do, prioritize some of those initiatives, and make sure over the next 5 to 10 years it invests judiciously. I think that's critical, super critical.
But eventually, does UPI need to be profitable or just enough to sustain itself, or does it need to turn
That's a
it?
government call. Right?
Okay.
I'll be honest, right now NPCI also is not for profit. Yes, the government at some point will want to make sure that whatever investments it puts in, it is earning back, at least, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, does the government want this to be a hugely profitable entity? Perhaps. Like the railways.
Yeah.
In India is the only country in the world where cargo subsidizes
the
passenger.
ulta, yeah.
In every other part of the world, passenger subsidizes cargo, right? So these kind of topsy-turvy things sometimes mess up the overall profitability. Not to talk about corruption, right? The level of our corruption is as large as our proliferation of UPI, right? So, but having said that, I think we've got a winner here. It's a utility.
We've got our headline. UPI is a utility.
UPI is like railways. Do you like talking about UPI in general? Are you like a UPI nerd?
I'm not a UPI nerd, but I follow payments very closely. I continue to follow payments very closely, both in India and
actually,
abroad.
that is one thing I was very interested in knowing, because you exited like the banking sector a while back, but you still write
I still write
continuously about
extensively.
it.
So I'll tell you, I think, so one, not that it's a big difference, but when you're in a bank, you cannot afford not to make profits.
Yeah.
So unlike most other payment companies in India, I did not have the luxury to make losses. So I tend to be a little more conservative in my approach
Yeah.
and trying to understand what is the business model. I'm just being very
Yeah.
honest, right? And so I continue to question, some of the business models that exist, some of the things that people are touting as, we can do this and we can do that, right? And I've always been interested in payments, banking, finance, e-commerce, privacy, right? So I continue to write about all of this because I really think that these are some of the driving forces of our age that will determine what our future looks like, right? And I think that's the reason this really interests me.
And also it's because it's something that literally everyone uses. There's not one person
That's right.
who
doesn't? In
is
some
alienated
way,
from
shape,
the
or form.
system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody uses this, right? So.
But do people, do you feel that they use it but not understand it enough? Or do they understand it just enough that as much as they should?
To be fair, right? When you and I take a paracetamol,
Exactly. Does
frankly,
it even
we
matter?
never read what is the
if they
chemical. We don't
understand
care.
it?
The doctor said, okay, pop it
Yeah.
and knock it back, right? So for a lot of people, it needs to work and it needs to be affordable. So if it works, if it is affordable and it's not a security risk, for most people that is reason enough to use it.
And I think
Right.
it should
And
be
I
like
think
that,
that's,
right?
I mean, to be
Everybody
honest,
doesn't have to be
it
like
should
a
be.
finance
Yeah,
expert.
they don't have to be
Yeah.
clued into how it, what is a mechanics.
Or if they
and
really want to know, they can just listen to our
Yes.
podcast.
That's true. That's so very true. Yeah.
Great.
Good.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this chat.
No,
Thanks,
thank
Ateesh,
you
for
so
joining
much.
us on this chat.
See you. We'll keep it
Thank
touch.
you. Take care.
Bye. Okay, thank you, Ateesh, for this conversation.
It was really nice. I had a lot of my questions answered.
Yeah, 100%. I would. Would you consider that this conversation was worth the money?
Of course it was. But I'm still reeling from the analogy and how perfectly it fits everything.
Yeah, the railway analogy. Yes.
It's like the more you talk about it, the more similarities you'll find. And I love such analogies.
Exactly. Yeah, I love analogies. Yeah, as well. And he talked about the 4 things that the government should do,
Yeah.
right? Making sure that the transactions are secure. That is, कि कोई track पे train रोक के लूट ना ले. Then making sure that it is seamless.
कि अगर बुलेट ट्रेन आ रही है तो तुम्हारे पास भी बुलेट ट्रेन होनी चाहिए.
Yeah. That it can be used for as many amount of people and as many different kinds of transactions, which is the same track should be used for a cargo as well as a passenger as well as a bullet train, as you said. So this is so interesting to simplify such a complex seeming topic for noobs like us. What are some of the biggest things that got cleared for you after this conversation about UPI?
Yeah, so some of my biggest questions were a lot about, I was very curious to know कि government कर क्या रही है यहाँ पे, and
कर क्या रही है and कर क्यों रही है?
But the way that he explained the various, the bigger plans that he thinks that the government has or should have.
Dude, अगर वो हो जाए, if whatever he's saying, if all of that actually happen, हम लोग मस्त विश्वगुरु बन जाएंगे.
Yeah, and because a lot of India's problems when it comes to the economy in general is because of our foreign exchange reserves being कि dollar नहीं है.
Yeah, dude, tell me about it. There have been people, YouTubers जिनका मैं fan हूँ. There are rappers जिनका मैं fan हूँ, जिनको मैंने tweet कर रखा है that dude, I'm so sorry I can't buy your merch because the conversion rate is so much.
Yeah. But like it's so interesting to think that something as small as UPI can be the starting point for that bigger change, like you said, like a revolution.
And it can be it can serve such a large range of people. तो गली का पान वाला भी अपनी sales बढ़ा सकता है, and the whole country can spark a economic revolution because of the same mechanism and the same train track, essentially.
Yeah.
For me, I think one question and one query that I have always had was the nature of NPCI itself, right? and how that makes money, और उसका क्या role है इस सब में? Is it just as he clarified for us, that it's a non-profit? And we used to think initially that it was a private entity, and a lot of people still think that it's a private entity, but it comes under the umbrella of the RBI and all of that. So that really put a lot of things in perspective for me when it comes to the role of NPCI as an entity, when it comes to controlling and maintaining this UPI ka train track. I am always gonna refer to UPI as a
train track.
It's the new AI. AI is a parrot. If you didn't get that reference, check out the first episode of The Big Story with Shamim and Anupam.
Yes. And it was also interesting for me was, the journey from, let's say, your credit card, debit card, net banking to UPI has a very big role of PayTM in the middle. And that he really, clarified for us ki in the absence of PayTM, something like UPI would have been much more difficult to be even adopted, because PayTM got people used to digital transactions that happen the way that they do with UPI.
Yeah. And even now, as he said, that PayTM still continues to be one of the biggest, merchants, not merchants, but one of the biggest companies that is empowering and spreading UPI along with
PayTM का logo change हो गया है, PayTM.
PhonePe and
PayTM's logo now says PayTM से UPI.
Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be just PayTM.
Oh. Nice. So. I hope that song doesn't change. I really like that song. PayTM karo, Jasleen Royal. Amazing. Nice, interesting. So guys, you let us know if you like this conversation with Ateesh, and I think send some love his way, I would say, to really break down this such a complex thing and a very ununderstood, I won't even say misunderstood thing of UPI. It's an ununderstood thing कि अपने को पता ही नहीं है चल क्या रहा है, सब use कर रहे हैं, but लगता है like for the longest time we used to think Google Pay is UPI, but then PayTM came with UPI and I was like, okay,
कोई भी use कर
UPI
सकता है,
is just कोई भी हो सकता है. Yeah. So I think that was this episode of The Big Story.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, we'll be back on the
15th of May.
This month. By the way, date याद है ना तुम लोगों को? 1st and 15th of every month.
Yes. लिख के रख लो,
mark कर लो, mark your calendar, alarm सब लगा लो, और हमें भी remind कर दिया करो.
Nice. So that was this episode of The Big Story. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you. This was Prateek.
And this was Anjali. And we'll see you in the next one.
The Big Story is a Quint original podcast executive produced by Shelly Walia and Ritu Kapoor. This episode was hosted, produced and edited by Anjali Palod and Prateek Lithu with theme music from BMG. A special thanks to our guest Ateesh Tankha.